Honestly, though, like, I could think of just as many, in the outdoors in Alaska chasing caribou, where it was, like,
Yeah,
just as dangerous as being in Honduras under fire. I've gone out
yeah.
on days that were, like, too cold for none of the hunters were going out. The only person stupid enough to go out was me, like, go out on a snowmobile, and you're just maybe 8 miles away from town, but, like, you tip your snowmobile and you get it stuck, and that's it.
Welcome back, everyone, to Vallerret's Creative Outsiders, another episode here where we look for the radical stories from behind the lens. I'm Lukas Riedl, joined by Carl van den Boom, as usual, our glove designer, camera whisperer, and all-around creative force on Vallerret's team. How's it going, Carl?
It's good, buddy. I love your intros. They always make me feel good. It's going good, and I'm excited for this one to hear
Yeah,
some
me
cool
too.
stories and dive into. Well, I won't spoil what's coming. You can do the introduction, but it's going to be great.
You can always take my place here. So, yeah, today's guest is a photographer whose work spans conflict zones, Arctic villages, wildlife migration, and some climate-driven transformation. She captures environmental change with honesty and emotion. Katie Orlinsky, welcome to Vallerret's Creative Outsiders.
Thank you.
So
Hey, Katie.
I will really boringly start with our very first question. I mean, listeners might know it now. So you've been shooting in a lot of different, I would call it a lot of different situations and climates and locations. What is one moment that, let's say, changed your perspective forever or stays with you forever?
I guess, one moment I could mention there's a bunch, but one was definitely my first trip to the Arctic. So before that, I had been, a documentary photographer and photojournalist that focused mostly on sort of social issues, conflict, and I was really focused on Latin America, a lot of work on the Mexican drug war, and then I kind of was known for that. So, I would freelance for the New York Times often in Latin American countries. And it was kind of a completely random assignment that sent me to photograph the Yukon Quest, which is a 1,000-mile dog sled race across the Yukon of Canada and then also subarctic Alaska. And yeah, it was totally out of my wheelhouse, but I also had been very burned out from, kind of very devastating conflict work. And so it came at a very good time. And then, yeah, I think just like I never really spent time in Canada. I didn't know how nice people were there. And so like none of my gear arrived. I made all these mistakes, not realizing like if you don't have your jacket, if you don't have all these things that you need for the cold, you can't do the work when you get to places like this. And there were issues, and so my bag hadn't arrived. But everybody was so nice that the folks at Air Canada in Whitehorse lent me their clothes because I was like, I have to get to this race, and how photographers get like we get so frantic, and they thought it was as important as I did. Looking back, I'm like, was it? And so they lent me gloves, they lent me a jacket, they lent me a pair of boots because I was just totally not prepared, not well dressed for it. I had my gear, which I knew to always, but yeah, I think I hadn't thought of anything that I was going to need everything that was in that bag of Arctic wear. Yeah, and so I got there on time to photograph the race in sort of all of these borrowed clothes, and then they drove my bag from Whitehorse to Dawson City, where I was shooting, and I got it. And so yeah, this is like a big advertisement for Air Canada. What for one, it was sort of like learning how unprepared I was for that work, but then also just sort of how but nobody will let you freeze and how kind of people take care of each other up north. And so that was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. And kind of from that moment on, I've been photographing in the Arctic ever since. And that was 2014.
Cool. How nice.
Yeah.
Just to rock up and then get some free jackets. Or like
Well, I
borrowed
gave them
jackets,
back.
I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. And I gave them
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
In my mind, they're like taking their jackets off their
No,
back and
yeah.
giving them to you. But I guess they were like lost and found stuff or
No, I mean,
whatever. They hooked you up.
she was like, oh, my husband will pick me up with a different jacket. And like, now I know
Ah,
what it's like, when you're in a place. I mean, their winters are so cold. It's like, between -30 and -60, like you have a lot of warm jackets when
yeah.
that's the life you live, as opposed to like the one that you treasure that you shouldn't have packed in your checked bag. But also just sort of the kindness of people. Yeah.
I live in mostly winter up here, and I have an array of jackets, array of like winter boots, and if I go home to New Zealand, I like have nothing to wear in like the summer. I've got no like street shoes. I've just got boots. But The Yukon Quest. That's a cool thing. I can say that I did the Iditarod.
Oh yeah.
I worked with some Huskies up in Alaska, and I didn't actually do the Iditarod, but I was the backup sled on the first day
Really?
where they go through the city.
That's so fun.
So I was like, I have technically
Yep.
been in the Iditarod as a dog musher.
That's awesome.
But
I know how big of a deal that
it
is.
was a really cool experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I've ended up photographing it for years. I loved it.
So cool. The dogs are amazing. And anyway, I won't derail this with Husky chat.
No, please. I know you could. Yeah, you could like clear a room once you start talking about dog mushing. It's very niche.
Very niche. And but the imagery and everything in that around the dogs and in the environment is spectacular.
It has this ingrained rawness and gives you that feel of like back in the day and stuff. So it's kind of with people who haven't been in the Arctic or like who haven't worked with dogs, which I have a little bit too as well, by the way.
Yeah.
It's Carl's fault. So I visited him in Kiruna, dog sledding and working at a dog sledding company. So I had no idea. And then I came there, and I'm also not a dog person, which is kind of fun. But I thought, give it a try, and it was kind of cool. It really was fun. It was like a great connection with the dogs, and then I had this like rawness. You felt like, I don't know. It threw me back to like, no cars, no electricity, and then you sled out there for a couple of hours and into that cold, snowy, beautiful landscapes. It just has this, I don't know, magic to it. I think if there people looking at those photos of the big fur hoods and stuff from the people and the dogs in front, it just gives them some good feels, and then yeah, I enjoy
And
it.
the noise,
And I
like
totally
not
see why
being
you
on a
get stuck on.
snowmobile. Like, so yeah,
Yeah.
snowmobiles are amazing, the places they can get you to and everything. But like, yeah, they're loud and they're not photogenic. If you're thinking about photography and just like just the sounds and sort of the experience is so special on a dog sled versus, a snowmobile.
It kind of merges like landscape, wildlife, and portrait photography in a way, because you have this all together. If you put it,
And if
in
you're
the
in the
right way.
right spot for the photo, some extreme sport, because it's often like very tranquil and the dogs are running in fairly straight lines on flat ground. But you come into some areas where it's gnarly little trails through trees and slopes, and the sleds work great on flat, and then you get them into a slope going downhill, and it's all just chaos. So
And it was an amazing excuse to see the landscape. Like there's places, because I started photographing races for years. I don't do it as much anymore because I sort of like did it, there's only so many magazines that are going to publish a story about the Iditarod. And then eventually you go through them all and like, you might have to wait 5 years till they'll do it again. So I feel like I just sort of did as much as I could do as a photojournalist, but it was like this way to see so many places across Alaska and Canada, like these excuses to go to these, small communities that why would you end up there otherwise? And to just see places that you wouldn't have seen from, even if you're flying in a small plane or what have you, or hiking, like you just can get to places that you wouldn't otherwise.
totally.
So how did that come together? It's like you have been in those conflict zones with the drug wars and all this, what I would call like the heavy stuff. And you said you have been a little burned out of it. So how did you get the chance to get score a job like that? Because I think a lot of people would love to do that.
Totally. I know, it's so fun. And then they gave the assignment to somebody that had never even heard of the Iditarod, grew up in New York City. So I also, it was just pure luck, I think. I had done a story for this magazine. It was Red Bulletin. They still exist. So it's sort of like the editorial magazine that Red Bull has. And I'd done a story for them in Mexico about pointy shoes, about like these boots that people would wear. And it was like a little bit in line with sort of like the narco corridos. And there was this hilarious trend where people would wear cowboy boots that literally were like, I don't know,
massive
those
toes
massive curling toes. And then they were getting popular in Texas. So I did that story for them. I did some work in Juarez for them. I'd been working a lot in Juarez, just sort of about how nightlife was coming back to that city after so long being one of the most dangerous places in the world. And then I guess, I don't know, because I was in North America, they just thought of me for this. I think Fritz was the name of the editor. And thank you, Fritz. It changed my life. So yeah, oftentimes, as like stories will come from, you'll be pitching them out. because it's something you're really passionate about. But sometimes you just will get lucky and get a random assignment that for something that you would have never discovered before, and it can lead to so much.
And you can really say that the Arctic in general and the people there and also the wildlife has like caught on to you and kind of defined the way we said 2014 till today has been defining your work as well,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I mean, I'll work, I did a story recently in Brazil and another one in New Mexico. So I'm not exclusively working in the Arctic, but it's what got me moving towards, environmental storytelling and, climate crisis focused work. I'll still document other things, but yeah, I think like kind of focusing on stories that have to do with the natural world and that, came from just being so blown away by this incredibly beautiful place, but also kind of seeing the effects of climate change firsthand, which as somebody that was, I think I'd understood it from more of just sort of like an intellectual position as opposed to really seeing it firsthand, which is what you do see up in the Arctic where it's, warming faster than anywhere else on the planet.
I'm thinking of two things here. One, you're still in a conflict zone. It's just without guns going off. You just fighting the
It's
war
an
with the
extreme
environment, or
environment.
us
Yeah.
against the environment, right? What goes into sort of, I guess, getting the message across with climate change, and I'll let you answer it, but because I feel like you need two images, right? Like before and after, what it was and what it is
Yeah.
now. Is there anything else?
I mean, yeah,
Like what is really
there's definitely that, like, watching you, and now we can really do it in real time, which is crazy. Like even, I was thinking like when I first started in kind of 2014, 2015, even now when I will go back to those places, it's been 10 plus years and they look so different. But you would just see rapid changes even from of a spring thaw perspective. There used to be certain times of the year when people would hunt. So a lot of my work focuses on subsistence hunting in indigenous communities because, these are people that know their land, know their landscape, know their animals so well. And so they can say firsthand really what the changes are in a way that, science really can't express. And so I would kind of work with them and follow them and yeah, just kind of you just over the course of a year or a season, you could see these kind of huge shifts happening that every summer is the warmest summer on record, year after year after year. And so
the?
this is something new. But then also sort of like with these climate stories, I think, for a while a lot of it was focused on nature and animals. And I think incorporating people and just understanding that, it's not just people, it's not just animals and landscapes, which we do and should care about, but it's, also people who we can relate to. And so I think most of my storytelling
Yeah.
about it always wants to incorporate that, there's people have been here for thousands of years. They're still there and sort of how this is impacting them and their voice and their opinions, because I feel like, they're really kind of the experts on the land and the landscapes. And also just access and being able to work there as a photographer, you have to work with other people. They have to be your guides and want to share this information with you. So yeah, I feel like people are such a crucial part of my storytelling, but also I think of Arctic storytelling that's impactful.
Yeah, it makes sense. We can relate to other people where we feel like we want to care about animals, and we do, but you're much more sort of empathetic with another person, especially if they're struggling to find food or their way of living is changing.
Yeah, it's a little deeper than the before and after of glaciers or icebergs, which is it's kind of a shocker moment, and then it vanishes again very quickly in a way. But the storytelling, and especially working with the indigenous people and really seeing their emotions and their fate. So if that's
Yeah.
the right word in this case, the human emotion just stays longer in someone and might work a little better than the hard facts.
And then also a little bit of hope too, because it's like there's a lot of gloom and doom with these stories because it is very scary. But there's a lot of interesting, especially in Canada, there's a lot of sort of like exciting initiatives that are going on where they're reintroducing species that were on the brink of extinction and sort of like different projects that are going on that kind of so that there's these also little elements that are glimmers of hope, so that people don't completely tune out from these stories because they are depressing.
So from a shooting perspective, I mean, it seems like you're used to like the tough stories over the years, but I guess that has changed over a longer career. How do you mentally prepare for something like that? Not just the harsh environment, but also the harsh realities you face, and
Yeah.
then you also, kind of ask. Yeah, I always think of asking those people if you're allowed to transport their story out there. I think not everyone's probably welcoming in that way in journalistic work. How do you prepare? How do you cope with that?
Right. I mean, I'll always just do stories where people want their story told. It's just doesn't, yeah, like you don't want to have to be convincing somebody to spend time with you or why it matters. And if they're not interested, they're not interested. It's very much like yeah, I think like photographers are just we get rejected all the time. I think you just have to be used to it and accept it. And there's being pushy in certain cases, where you're dealing with maybe an institution or yeah, people sort of in positions to get access. But when it comes to just sort of like, people in communities, it's just if they want their story told, it's just such a easier and more pleasant experience. And there's always going to be something beautiful and hopeful just meeting these new people and kind of developing that relationship that I think makes it easier to tell hard stories sort of so like that human connection. And also I like to work in really beautiful places. So they might be hard or sad stories, but there's also going to be kind of beauty surrounding the area, and that makes it a lot easier too to just like be able to go take a walk to the river. Yeah, just kind of being able to be in beautiful places makes a big difference.
But it raises the question for me. It's like, because you need to find a balance, right? You need to find a balance between the beauty that you want to shoot as a photographer, obviously, because you go somewhere and it's a beautiful place and you get the landscape and everything. And then, but you also have to balance it with the urgency in that fragile
Yeah.
place, or like the tragedy of the people or the animals you're portraying. How do you balance that too?
Yeah, I mean, like it's not actually that hard to find the negative, right? So it's sort of yeah. I think part of it is that. I mean, you balance it because you want to tell a well-rounded story, and then also you need to take care of yourself emotionally, right? So there's some photographers, all their work is purely in conflict zones, and I do think that for them, like the thing that keeps them going are the connections that they make with the people that they're photographing, the friendships that they'll build and sort of like those small moments of joy. And you have to capture that to get people to care too. Yeah, but it's hard. It is very hard to do that balance. And then on top of it, you're often alone and away from home. So it's like, I don't know, the dogs are very helpful sometimes. Like if you're in a faraway community and things are like I'll just wander around and pet people's dogs. And that's also how I end up meeting people who I end up like photographing and spending all sorts of times with, is like meeting their dogs first. But it is one of the things I'll do is like I'll walk around and meet dogs to just sort of like, you know, calm myself and just sort of be able to hang around and yeah, not bug people all the time as a
That is a
photographer.
that is a sneaky life hack. I
Yeah.
like it. Because you come up and you start being friendly to someone's dog, they're automatically like, it's like a gateway to their
Yeah.
heart. You're like, yeah, you like my dog? He's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're just like, you're in there.
Dogs make everything better.
Get it?
How does one get into conflict photography and sort of journalist?
Yeah.
I can see it being so exciting, also super dangerous, but just it's not like a door that opens to everyone, I guess. So how do you start there?
Yeah, I mean, I think quite a few different paths. I can only really speak for myself. And I think, was a young photographer, and actually my first job ever was working for El Noticias de Oaxaca, which is the local newspaper in Oaxaca, Mexico. I just moved there after graduating college, and then a conflict there broke out. So it kind of it sort of came to me. Yeah, and looking back, like, I didn't have the right gear, and my photos weren't even that good, and I watched, but it was like I got to see sort of the New York Times photographer who was sent there on assignment and the La Jornada photographer that is the big newspaper in Mexico City, and sort of watch how they worked, learn from that, and I realized that I was good at it. I was good at sort of, knowing where to be and just sort of how to manage those kind of like stressful and extreme and violent situations. I was kind of good on my feet. I'm a New Yorker, so you have some street smarts. And I also had been an activist when I was younger. I'd been to lots and lots of protests, and obviously there's a huge difference between a real conflict and a protest. But I think sort of seeing that I had a knack for it made me want to focus on it more. And but I did, it wasn't sort of I didn't that was during the time period of the Iraq War, and I had no interest in embedding with the US military, so I didn't want to cover that. it also sort of depended on my interests. And so it wasn't really until the Mexican drug war that I started kind of covering more violent issues and conflict, but it was because I really cared about that issue. So that's part of something that
Mm.
I would kind of suggest to photographers interested in conflict photography is like, you know, kind of ask yourself why and what it is that you care about, because it'll just be so your work will be better and it'll be so much more meaningful if you're documenting something that speaks to you and relates to you and that you have a lot of knowledge about. I spoke Spanish and I had been living in Mexico for a while, so it was right for me. But then I started covering other conflicts as well, and I think it was part of it was just wanting to document history. Sort of, I would see something going on TV, and like it pained me. I'd watch it and I'd be like, I
Mm.
want to be there. I just wanted to be wherever, news was happening. And I think, yeah. And I think if you have that feeling, I think, safety first always. But I think like you kind of just have to go and do it. You learn on your feet, but you
So
also,
you could literally just go to a conflict zone, I guess, providing you can get into the country and just start taking photos, or you have to go through
I
the
would
right
know
channels,
how to,
or
I would have I was already working at, I think you also need to be a working photographer before that. So you definitely, not
sure.
like a war
We do not
tourist.
recommend to simply go to a conflict
No,
zone.
no, not at
I
all.
just want to
No.
point that out.
At some point though, you kind of have to make that leap. And I don't, and it's and fortunately now they won't just take photos from anyone that shows up in a conflict zone, because for a while, you were get people were getting themselves hurt. They get other people around them hurt because they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they're just sort of not there for the right reasons. But I think, if you've been a photographer for a while, there's something happening in the world that you're really passionate about. You have some mentors, some people that are there already, like you kind of just do have to go do it.
Yeah, that's what I've sort of picked up just from I read a few books and some movies, and the photographers in these not crime zones, what do you call
Conflict
them,
zones, yeah.
conflict zones. They're very passionate in a way where they just they believe their work is so important, so that comes first, right? So they're just like very in this big belief of this work's important, and it gives them meaning and beyond just there to take photos. So
And it
it's kind of
does.
this what I hear you saying as well. It drives you very deeply and emotionally to go and showcase and document what's happening.
And you're knowledgeable about what's happening. So it's something that either for, that you either speak the language, you have a personal connection, you have the resources. I think one way like I was able to kind of start documenting is I worked with NGOs. So I would work in disaster zones, which is um, you know, something different. And then you also know, do you have the stomach for this? You're going to see awful things.
Mm.
You're going to smell awful things, and like you have to believe that these pictures are important, and that that you're comfortable being there, because there's kind of no lack of photographers wanting to be there. So it's like if you think it's right for you, then I don't wouldn't want to dissuade anybody. But yeah, it's like just I definitely didn't mean like jump on a plane, but I meant more as if like, you're already a working freelance photographer and there's something going on that you're really interested in and passionate about, then you kind of just have to take the leap and go make the pictures without an assignment.
You must have some crazy stories. Is there something that sticks out as a memory of maybe a situation you shouldn't have been in, or it can be both
So many.
negative or positive, but is there
Yeah.
so many? Is there something you can share
I mean,
briefly?
sure. I mean, honestly though, like I can think of just as many in the outdoors in Alaska chasing caribou, where it was like
Yeah.
just as dangerous as being in Honduras under fire. Yeah, where I just sort of like I don't when like it's the wilderness, especially sort of like the Alaskan wilderness is an especially amazing place, but just like nobody's there to help you. I've gone out
Yeah.
on days that were like too cold for any, none of the hunters were going out. The only person stupid enough to go out was me. Like go out on a snowmobile and you're just maybe 8 miles away from town, but like you tip your snowmobile and you get it stuck, and like that's it, right? You're like 8 miles, to like you're walking back. It's so hard. Unfortunately, in this case, I was working with a great writer, Neil Shea, and And I, and I had my inReach, and so he could, and I didn't have to embarrass myself and let like the search and rescue or anybody in this community know. I was like, Neil, come get me. I got my snowmobile stuck, and he was like, you should have got out today. I was like, no. But yeah, so there's things like that that could turn out obviously way worse. There was a time driving in a car. I was with somebody, and we made a wrong turn, and we didn't realize that the ice road was closed, and we drove on it, and we just really could have literally gotten like swept out into the frozen river, and like we like felt the ka-chunk and like backed up quick enough, and then finally saw the sign like, oh, this, yeah, we
This
would
is
have
close.
sunk, and like, yeah. So yeah, so
Bonkers.
there's instances like that, and then as before that, when I did more sort of work in conflict zones, yeah, I think it's like it's never as scary as it is every day for the people living there, So
Mm.
you get to sort of experience this thing briefly and leave, and they don't. And so I feel like, yeah, it's like none of that is really, I don't feel like necessarily brave to go, to go somewhere where people are living this way every day and take pictures and leave. Like if anything, it's like I feel really lucky that I get to do that.
Yeah. I feel like that kind of gets forgotten, or at least not part of the picture. I'm quite big on watching like World War II documentaries and movies and stuff, and then you'll see like this fight going on in like in a village, and then all of a sudden people coming out of their houses, and you're like, oh, people are still living there. Like there's this whole thing going on, but people are still trying to have a life, and it's yeah, I feel like it's easy to forget that people are still trying to
I did a lot of work
carry on.
in Mali, which was sort of after what I thought was after the conflict in 2012, and it turned out it wasn't at all. And so when I got there, it was still incredibly dangerous, and we had to have kind of like UN military escorts everywhere we went. But it was supposed to be a post-conflict story, because I do think that sort of the most interesting stories come kind of like after the big, exactly like you were saying, after the big fights and the big news, and sort of things that are happening that are big and exciting and photogenic. And then it's after that when there's, so much that people have to tell. And there's nobody there to hear it anymore. So that's a lot of the work I like to do,
Mm.
is sort of in post-conflict situations, not active conflict.
Is there for you for telling the story? Is there or like how would I frame this? Like how far is too far to go for the story? Like
Yeah.
where's the limit?
There's has to be a limit. I think you have family at home, and I think, yeah, you have to live. You have to be able to, leave and get your photos out and tell that story. But also, I don't think anybody's asking, necessarily needs anybody to risk their life. But also, you don't travel alone. Journalists have drivers, they have fixers. There's people on the ground, there's local people who are almost always helping you do that work. So the limit is, if anything endangers others, so, and oftentimes by endangering yourself, you're endangering others. So that's absolutely the limit, in my opinion.
And it sounds like the smart way to tackle photography in the Arctic too,
Yeah.
having a team
It
and
is,
people
it is. And
around
I've
you.
gone my own, because I will say, there are definitely like, I think it's amazing being a female photographer, but you still just have to deal with a lot of obnoxious, misogynistic men. They're everywhere. Sometimes there happen to be a lot more in places like the Arctic, not Canada. Canadians are nice. I'm talking about the USA. So yeah, so there was one story where the pilot was just such an asshole that I just like, I couldn't deal with working with them. And so I was on my own. And yeah, and it was hard. It was hard. I don't think I would have
Yeah, there's definitely some colorful people in remote
Yes,
places.
yeah,
I think is
exactly. And I think
a nice
and there's colorful
way
people
to put it.
in big cities as well, right? But sometimes,
Yeah.
there's just in a bigger city, you can go to the next person, but sometimes there's the one guy who can get you where you need to go, and you have to put up with it. And so yeah,
That's
I
the guy
think
you need.
it's the guy you need. Yeah. So I ended up kind of camping and hiking alone on my own for days, which was great for the story, but in the it would have been nice to have had a guide. But I didn't want to have to deal with this person for 24 hours. I just was like, drop me off, and yeah.
I mean, I could hound you for so many more interesting stories, but should we go with a quick fire, Lucas? Unless you got something.
I would say we'd like we're still okay, but I would have one more question. Is like because with telling all the stories and taking all the photos. So I can't really compare it, but I've been working in documentary work, and that was more like the good feel kind of things, like the fun stories, sports, and all that. But even there, I felt like the responsibility of telling the story. So how do you balance the impact of your storytelling and the photos and having the responsibility of telling it correctly?
Yeah, I think kind of the dignity and integrity of of the folks that you're photographing and that are sharing their story with you is number one. Yeah. So I think, and sometimes I just try to avoid ever taking jobs or working in situations where you feel like there's a conflict there, where the people who you're working with aren't going to be happy with the story. And that's, I can't say, but if I was, if you have a story and they're asking you to photograph, what's going on with ice, sure, ice won't, I don't mind if they're unhappy with what I'm documenting, right? So it's always, of course, contextual. But yeah, there's probably other words that people can use, like than subjects, right? But for the purpose of this, like, yeah, just kind of the respect of your subjects. Like, no story's worth, publishing anything that they didn't agree to or that they're not going to be happy or excited with. But if it's journalism and it's a hard truth, then that is a tricky balance. I think just like yeah, I think just as long as you're completely open and honest with what it is you're doing, then I think you'll feel good at the end of the day with what comes out. But I think in most cases, I'm not really kind of doing that kind of journalism. Writers have to deal with that much more, I think, than photographers. I think photographers we're often working with willing subjects. But it
Yeah,
is good to
that is
to have,
it's true.
but with, I mean, sometimes publications get bought by a new owner and you might not like the direction of the work coming out. So that is really hard. I mean, another thing that's really hard is if a story gets killed. Like you spend all this time with somebody
Mm.
and then the work doesn't come out. And I think, when that happens, I've had it happen and I did my best to get the work published in another publication and that did work. So you felt like, you were still giving them something. But that's something that is happens sadly more and more, is like you'll take up a lot of people's time and they're really excited for the story to come out, and then maybe it gets killed or it gets cut to an extent where their section isn't as featured, so that can be a real shame. And so then it's good to always sort of take that work and try to get it published elsewhere so that you can kind of so you can keep up to your promises.
Any stories you still feel you want to tell
Oh my
in the near
gosh,
future?
so many. Yeah, there's so many. I've started doing more underwater photography, so I'd love to do more work with just like more work with oceans, also seagrass. Yeah, there's just like there's just so many interesting places, and then there's just a lot of like cool science going on with marine mammals and their intelligence. So yeah, so I think I'd like to do more work in warm places, even though I love the Arctic. I think it might be nice to do some more sort of like ocean underwater work.
It feels like another new direction from your storytelling.
Yeah, I think
That's
so. I
great.
think I'm ready like for a new like a new physical challenge as well. Just like the Arctic is, my dream is still like when I retire to become a dog musher. So we'll have to talk about that because I was always
Yeah.
photographing it, but I was like, I need to see if I could actually do this. But yeah, until then, until I go back to the cold, I'd like to, kind of get more into underwater photography.
And that's a perfect
Interesting.
bracket to sum up the podcast because Katie has other obligations to fulfill, what we totally understand. I think there's one, we skipped the quick fire for this for reason of time. It's not such a big deal, but could you just try to put your work in one word or like a short sentence? In your case, I guess.
Oh my gosh, that's really hard. In one word or short sentence? I think right now it's about the relationship between people and the environment.
Very nice.
I'll work on that for next time, but yeah.
Yeah. I summed this up as one word. It's important,
Important.
at least from
Yeah.
my perspective.
Yeah.
I'd say so.
And you have to tell yourself that, or else how do you make, how do you do this low paying, stressful job? You have to feel that it's important. And I think, is it important to the world? Maybe. Is it important to you? Absolutely. And you want it to be important to the people that you're photographing as well.
Amen. That's all I can say. All right. Carl, you got one more?
I've got too many questions. Oh, especially when she's talking about dog mushing.
I know.
I can share some stories. Perfect. Hey, thanks so much for coming on and joining us and sharing some stories. It was great chatting you and nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing the stories with us. And to everyone listening, you can find all the information, links and background info on Katie in the show notes below. Make sure to check it out. There's a lot of cool, important work to see. Great photography and great storytelling. If you're just listening, we have a full video version on YouTube with some additional visuals and behind the lens content. So if you want to see more, head over there. Subscribe wherever you're listening or watching and leave us a comment. We always love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode of Vallerret's Creative Outsiders. Thanks, Katie. Have a good one.